Welcome to Crime Clueless. We're your hosts. I'm Jenna.
And I'm Lara.
I'm Krista.
This is Crime Clueless After Hours.
Sorry.
At 6:30 p.m.
I mean, I've already been up for 14 hours, so
Oh, I
feels like after hours.
think I woke
I've
up
been
at
up for
5.
7 hours.
Oh.
Oh. Half as long
I've
as
almost
Jenna.
hit my 12
Yeah.
hours for today of standing.
Oh, good.
I'm over 12 hours awake.
Well, to be fair, I have 4. I had an hour at 3 a.m.
I have 14
so
stand
I've got
hours.
6 hours. Yeah.
I had to charge my
Yeah,
watch while I got
6,
ready,
yeah.
so
Oh,
yeah. That was a long day.
I got woken up at 5 a.m. for children asking why the fire alarm was flashing a light. Why
House
are you
on
looking
fire?
at your fire alarm at 5 a.m.? Go back to sleep.
Yeah, it's one thing if it's making noise, but
It
if
wasn't
it's just
making any
flashing-
noise.
Oh, no.
Just a red flash.
No.
So
not
it might be
okay.
almost out of battery.
Well, at least they're not scared of it. My dog is scared of the fire alarm.
Oh,
If it beeps, she starts panting and hyperventilating and won't get off me.
she was real mad when mine broke when you
Yeah.
were watching my house. Yeah.
No, she
It's
like
never made it back up there.
guys, I can't watch Severance
oh,
with her because they do so much key cards and beeping like in the elevator and Oh, stuff. poor She Lola. freaks out.
oh
We
my
were walking the
gosh.
other day and my neighbor's fire alarm was like beeping like the batteries were low
Mhm.
and she heard it and she was
Ah,
like she's scared of beeping.
Oh.
sad.
Yeah, my big scary pit
I
bull.
do like
Mhm.
Severance, though.
Yeah, me too, but I can't watch it unless I'm on my phone
Oh,
with
I'm
my
like
headphones.
another episode behind
Even-
now.
I'm 2 episodes
I'm so
behind.
behind.
Me too.
Me
Yeah.
too.
But don't worry, guys. I watched all 8.
Seasons behind.
I watched all 8 seasons of Game of Thrones in a week.
Nice.
Well done.
That's what happens when I'm sick.
Yeah. Yep. I'm glad you're feeling better.
Thank you. Me too.
The only way to watch that show, though. 'Cause when you get to the
Oh.
end, you have to start the next one.
That is
yeah,
true.
That's true. They're all cliffhangers.
Yes.
It's a fact. But I
Yeah.
also got a little hyperfixated with my ADHD, and that's all that I could do. And so I didn't get a lot of sleep this week because I was like, oh, I'll just watch one more. And then all of a
Yeah.
sudden it was 11 p.m. every night. And I'm like, oh, I actually have to be an adult and get up and go to work in the morning.
Yes. I know.
So,
Brandon wants to watch like multiple shows, and I'm like, I got to finish Breaking Bad, though.
Yeah.
We're at the end of season 4.
I get that way too.
I can't go
have-
from show to show.
I have a whole list of things. I'm like, I got to finish How I Met Your Mother for the 8th time.
Yeah.
Not even a new
too.
show.
That is
But
priority.
we started it.
I have a toddler, and we're just watching If You Give a Mouse a Cookie over and over again.
We watched Bluey all day.
Yeah.
So Severance, Game of Thrones, Bluey,
We
If You Give a Mouse a Cookie.
Yeah.
I still want to watch that, actually,
It's
though.
actually not bad.
We're all on very
Yeah.
different ends of the spectrum of what we're watching.
Well, I want to be
Yes.
watching a lot of things, but by the time
Yeah.
she goes to sleep, I'm tired.
So your dog won't let you watch shows, and your toddler
yeah.
prevents you. Yeah.
That's why I put mine to bed at 7.
Ah,
I
smart.
have to have time to watch my shows.
Yes. Understood. Everyone have a good day.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, actually, I was going to tell you guys, I was at the park with my toddler this morning, and we went down this huge slide, and we come out of it, and I was like, take care of her because she face planted
Oh,
into the wood chips. And she's like rubbing them in her eyes. I'm trying to fix it. And this guy comes up and he's like, is this yours? And it was my pepper spray. Came out in the slide. So yes, I have my pepper spray. I'm glad it wasn't my taser.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Keep
I'm,
an eye
I'm
on your
also
things.
glad a kid didn't grab it and be like, oh, what's
Yes.
this?
I was like,
Oh.
they're going to kick me out of this park. I'm never going to be allowed in this park again. But at least he laughed about it. And he was like, oh, I thought maybe we were spraying the slide. And I was like, no, definitely not. I'm not trying to get kicked out of here. My
No.
toddler's favorite park.
Oh,
Oh,
I hate the wood chips in the park.
I know, me too. We come
I
home and
hate
she like
that.
dumps out an entire sandbox of them.
Yeah. And you've got splinters everywhere.
Yes.
They're
Yeah.
the worst.
I hate the wood chips.
The wood chips suck, but I mean, I
It's
guess
better than
better
sand.
than sand.
It's
Oh.
definitely better than sand. A giant litter box.
Yeah.
For a
Oh,
park.
No sand.
Yeah, no.
My
Ours-
kids have wood chips at their school, so they always have them in their shoes when they come home from school. And then they
Oh,
just dump
shoot.
them out when they get home. I'm like, can you do that outside?
Although Amelia used to come home and dump out sand everywhere every
Oh.
day.
I hate sand even worse.
Yeah. They're all
Well,
bad.
When I was in elementary school, I take them into class and color on them and then bring them home. So I'm sure
The
that
wood
that would,
chips?
yeah, I don't know why.
I don't know why.
Because you were artsy.
Yeah.
Yeah, you were. Mila would do that with rocks.
Yeah.
Bring those home. Her backpack was real heavy all the time.
You
Yeah,
know
I'm
how
sure
many
my
painted
pockets were
rocks
full
I
of-
have in my backyard?
Yeah, 3
Mine-
times as many as I have probably.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Mine just bring home rocks because they're pretty.
Yeah, same.
This one's probably a rare gem.
Yep, they all are.
So that's why we're carrying a bag of rocks in our backpack.
You have a rock tumbler?
I do have a rock tumbler.
Yes.
Good.
Good.
I love that.
And we have tumbled many rocks.
Have you ever found a rare gem?
Only in the rocks that came with the rock tumbler.
But maybe
this
one
one-
day.
But we
That's
haven't
usually how
broke
it
them
goes.
all open because they might be geodes. We don't know.
Oh,
Should
okay.
break them open.
I can't.
Come on, Laura. Where's your sense of adventure?
It's
Thrown into the backyard.
it's like a
It's like 50
the
rocks ago.
wrecking rooms, you know? You
Yes.
could do that with your rock.
The
With my
rage
rocks.
rooms?
The rage room, that's what
Those,
it is.
those are fun.
They're
Oh.
awesome.
Except for when you accidentally hit your finger and your knuckle on the printer that you're trying to bash with a baseball bat.
Going a little too hard there.
I did.
Kayla?
Yeah.
Mhm. Worth it though.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the printer
100%.
was fun to break. So
I like that.
It is fun. Yeah.
it's
Printers
fun.
are infuriating.
They really are. They should have a whole room full of those so you could go
Mhm.
break them.
Yeah, they had a
Your one
bunch
at
of
home
different
doesn't
things that you
work.
could break.
Mhm.
Yeah.
They had
I
something you
love
could
it.
like hang up like a bottle, so then
Mm.
you can like swing at it like a baseball.
Like a pinata.
Mhm.
Well, yeah, that too. But you were okay. You were holding a baseball bat, so that's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
A baseball.
Glass
Pinata.
everywhere.
Yeah,
What do you hit pinatas with?
Baseball bat.
stick,
Exactly.
a stick.
Baseball bat.
Baseball bats. Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
All right.
I did want to give a shout out to mom and dad because we haven't yet. And they listen to every episode.
I love
And,
Yay. Thanks,
Yes.
Mom and Dad.
Yeah, you guys are the best and you're
I
always so
appreciate
supportive.
them.
So
Always asking questions.
I know.
Or sending theories after.
I
Mhm.
love it.
Mhm.
Yep. Dad now sends me memes that are the best, that are true crime related. And I love it. Yeah. It's
He
the
also
best.
suggested with your facts that we have unlimited episodes going
Yeah,
forward.
that's
so
true.
we're all
That's
set.
true.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So wanted to shout them out. You ready to dive into this case?
Let's do it.
All right. It was a quiet, unassuming spring afternoon in Bedford County, Virginia, when a neighbor grew concerned. Derek and Nancy Haysom, a well-respected, worldly couple, hadn't been seen in a few days. Their stately home, usually a picture.
I was almost there and the camera started.
I'm sorry. That was
Okay.
my bad.
Laughing.
I mean, I was trying to block you two out. Like,
I'm sorry.
hard.
I saw Krista like trying not to laugh, and then it.
Fine. And then Kayla laughed. Then I laughed. Okay. We can do this.
Oh, it's good. I enjoy it.
I'm not a
I
professional.
enjoy our time together, and I'm just leaving everything in this episode.
Great.
Mhm. Yeah, it'll be off the rails.
Okay.
Okay.
In the blooper.
Yeah,
In the
yeah.
blooper one.
This will be our most unhinged episode yet.
Yet being
Prepared.
the operative word there. Okay. So for the Haysoms, their stately home, usually a picture of affluence and order, was eerily silent. When authorities entered the house, what they found wasn't just a murder scene. It was a bloodbath. Derek and Nancy Haysom had been brutally slaughtered, their throats slashed with such force that their heads were nearly severed. Whoever did this wasn't just angry, they were furious. This wasn't a botched robbery or a random attack. This was personal.
So creepy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't want
Gosh.
to be the one to walk into that scene.
Find
first.
that.
No.
Yeah.
Ugh.
And yet, at first glance, there were no clear suspects, no signs of forced entry, no immediate motive. The Haysoms were, by all accounts, sophisticated, well-traveled, and successful. They had wealth, but no known enemies. So who wanted them dead and why? This is the story of the Haysom murders, a case that started with a grisly crime scene and spiraled into an international scandal. A story of obsession, manipulation, and a love so toxic it left 2 people dead and sent 2 more to prison. Buckle up. This one is a wild ride.
This one sounds like it's going to be interesting.
Mhm.
I'm excited.
Before we get into the crime, let's talk about Derek and Nancy Haysom. Because to understand the brutality of what happened to them, you have to understand who they were. These weren't just any victims. Derek and Nancy were the epitome of high society. They were wealthy, cultured, well-traveled, the kind of people who seemed to glide through life with effortless sophistication, attending exclusive dinner parties, sipping fine wine, and enjoying the kind of quiet luxury that most people can only dream of. Derek William Reginald Haysom was born in South Africa, but carried himself like the kind of man who probably corrected people's pronunciation of Chateau Margaux.
So he'd be correcting you?
Yes, he would.
I think it is Chateau Margaux.
Margaux, yeah. Chateau Margaux at dinner parties. He's educated at prestigious schools in England. He had a sharp mind, a quick wit, and the very British ability to make a cutting remark sound polite. He had built a successful career in the steel industry, and by the time he and Nancy settled in Virginia, they were living a very comfortable life. Their home in Lynchburg wasn't just a house, it was a statement, a sprawling estate, elegant, refined, nestled in the kind of peaceful, picturesque setting that made it hard to imagine anything sinister could happen there. Nancy Alistair Benedict Haysom was every bit as impressive as her husband. An American from a prominent family, she was intelligent, graceful, and well-versed in the arts. She had a charm that made people gravitate towards her, well, unless you happened to be her daughter, Elizabeth. While Nancy may have been the perfect hostess, the ideal dinner guest, and the embodiment of upper-class refinement, her relationship with Elizabeth was complicated, but we'll get to that later. Together, Derek and Nancy were a power couple before Instagram made that a thing. They had traveled the world, lived in various countries, and built a life that seemed from the outside perfect. On March 30th, 1985, Derek and Nancy were supposed to have dinner plans with friends. When they didn't show, people assumed that they had lost track of time or maybe had an impromptu getaway, maybe some sort of last-minute change. But as the hours turned into days and no one heard from them, a friend grew worried. That's when the call was made to check on them, and that's when police walked into a nightmare. On April 3rd, 1985, the tranquil facade of loose chippings, the elegant residence of Derek and Nancy Haysom in Bedford County, Virginia, was shattered. 3 women arrived for their weekly bridge game with the Haysoms, only to find the porch light on and their knocks unanswered. Using an emergency key, they entered, stumbling upon a scene that probably haunted them forever. The police were summoned and arrived promptly. Inside, they found remnants of a meal on the dining table, a plate of leftovers, and a dish of ice cream, suggesting the couple had been interrupted during dinner. The scene was gruesome. Derek lay on his left side near a doorway, his arm outstretched. His body bore over 36 stab wounds to the torso. His face was disfigured with lacerations, and his throat had been slit from ear to ear, nearly decapitating him. Nancy was found face down on the kitchen floor, exhibiting similar stab wounds and a slashed throat, also nearly decapitated. Blood stained the floors extensively, indicating a violent struggle.
Wow.
That's horrifying.
Horrible. The meticulous collection of forensic evidence provided critical insights. There were 4 distinct blood types identified, A and AB corresponding to the victims, and B and O, which were unaccounted for. Investigators discovered 2 types of bloody footprints, one from a tennis shoe and another from a sock, suggesting the possible presence of more than one perpetrator. A vodka bottle and shot glass, both bearing fingerprints, were found at the scene. Given the victim's high blood alcohol levels, 22%, it appeared they had been drinking prior to the attack. However, we do know that blood alcohol levels can rise post-mortem, so we're not entirely sure what their blood alcohol levels had been during the attack. Blood had been swirled on the floor of the dining and living rooms as if the killer had attempted to cover their tracks, literally. There were no signs of forced entry, implying the Haysoms may have known their assailants and allowed them inside willingly. The nature of the crime led investigators to consider several possibilities. They considered a personal motive because of the brutality of the murders. It was suggested some sort of deep-seated hatred or passion for the victims. This is often indicative of a personal relationship between the victims and the perpetrators. There was a lack of robbery motive. Valuables, including Nancy's jewelry and her purse full of cash, were untouched, ruling out robbery. And then because of the different blood types and the 2 different footprints, it hinted at the involvement of more than one individual. With the crime scene thoroughly examined and initial evidence collected, investigators began piecing together the events leading up to the murders. Attention turned to the Haysoms' acquaintances, family members. Investigators were seeking interviews with anybody they could, trying to uncover potential leads. The funeral happened just a couple days after the murders. The memorial service for Derek and Nancy was held at St. John's Episcopal Church in Lynchburg, Virginia. The town's elite gathered to pay their respects, filling the pews in solemn recognition of the couple's place in the community. Well-dressed mourners whispered to each other in hushed tones, exchanging condolences and speculation in equal measure. The Haysoms weren't the kind of people you expected to meet such a violent end, and now, behind the genteel facade of the ceremony, questions were beginning to swirl. At the center of it all, Elizabeth, their daughter, she arrived hand in hand with Jen Soaring, their presence impossible to ignore. Grief, the kind that you would expect from a daughter who had just lost her parents in such a brutal way, was absent. There were no tears, no trembling voice, no visible sorrow. Instead, Elizabeth was composed, almost detached, as if she were merely a guest at the event rather than its central figure. And again, people process grief in different ways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But,
Well, especially coming to a scene like that, that
Mhm.
would be,
Traumatizing.
yeah, I would be in shock.
Yeah.
And losing both your parents in such a horrific way, too. Both, not even just one, to have someone to lean on. Maybe she was
Yeah.
Yep.
detached and kind of shocked. And
Yeah. She and Jen sat close together, whispering to one another, almost a world apart from the mourning family and friends surrounding them. The dynamic was impossible to miss. Jen's was her shadow, watching every move, eager to comfort her at even the slightest indication that she needed him. But that moment never seemed to come. Murmurs among the guests began to spread. Shouldn't she be devastated? Why doesn't she seem more affected? And who is that boy she won't let go of? Family members, particularly Elizabeth's half-siblings from her father's previous marriage, took notice. They had already found Elizabeth difficult to connect with over the years. She was brilliant but distant, charming but somehow untouchable. And then there was Jens. He was polite but stiff and strangely possessive over Elizabeth's attention. He was playing the role of the doting boyfriend, but something felt off, as if he weren't just being supportive, but standing guard. So who was Elizabeth? Elizabeth was a bright, well-educated, cultured young woman raised in a world of privilege. She was born in 1964 in Salisbury, Rhodesia, which is now Zimbabwe. She was the only child of Derek and Nancy. Her parents had traveled extensively with her, moving through Africa, Europe, and North America, exposing Elizabeth to a refined international lifestyle. However, Elizabeth's upbringing was far from perfect. She would later describe her childhood as lonely and difficult, shaped by strict parents with high expectations. As she got older, Elizabeth was sent to boarding school in England, a place that both shaped her intellectual brilliance and fueled her rebellious nature. She attended Wycombe Abbey, a prestigious all-girls school known for its academic excellence and upper-class student body. She was described by teachers and peers alike as intelligent, charming, and artistically inclined. She excelled in literature and languages, qualities that were very helpful to her. She resented authority and structure, and those traits had emerged in defiance of her parents throughout her life. During this time, she experimented with drugs and developed a taste for defying expectations. Her privileged upbringing gave her access to money and influence, but she seemed to crave excitement and danger. By the time she returned to the U.S. for college, Elizabeth's relationship with her parents had grown tense. Derek and Nancy disapproved of her wild lifestyle. They were concerned about her choices in friends and relationships. Some believed that Elizabeth saw them as obstacles to her independence. And then in 1984, she crossed paths with Jens Soaring, a young man who was as intellectually sharp as she was, but younger, more naive. Jens was born in Bangkok in 1966 to a German diplomat. Jens lived a life of constant movement. His family status meant frequent relocations, and as a result, Jens had few deep social connections. Instead, he focused on academics, developing a razor-sharp intellect that landed him at the University of Virginia on a full scholarship. He was a self-proclaimed intellectual, obsessed with philosophy and literature, but socially awkward, a lonely boy in a world of confident, privileged American students. Then he met Elizabeth. She was everything he wasn't. She was worldly, charismatic, rebellious. She made him feel chosen. And for a boy who had spent his life feeling out of place, that was everything. Jens fell hard, fast, and completely. He saw Elizabeth as his soulmate, someone brilliant and maybe troubled, a woman who needed him. He believed their love was Shakespearean, a tragic romance worth sacrificing anything for. Jens and Elizabeth's relationship developed quickly. They shared the love of literature and philosophy. They had an infatuation with pushing intellectual boundaries and deep emotional dependence on each other. Elizabeth was captivating, free-spirited, Jens eager to please. The University of Virginia was founded by Thomas Jefferson in 1819. It was and still is one of the most prestigious public universities in the country, known for its rigorous academics, its historic campus, and selective admissions. UVA attracts some of the brightest young minds from the U.S. and abroad. For Jens and Elizabeth, UVA wasn't just a university. It was a gateway to an elite world of privilege and intellectual challenge. Jens, being the German diplomat's son, arrived at UVA on a Jefferson Scholarship, the university's most prestigious academic award. The Jefferson Scholarship was and still is highly competitive. It's a merit-based scholarship given to students who demonstrate exceptional intelligence, leadership, and character. It covered full tuition, room, board, basically a golden ticket to an elite education reserved for only the most gifted students. The selection process was rigorous, involving multiple interviews, academic assessments, and leadership evaluations. And it's primarily offered to international students and only the most outstanding American applicants, aiming to cultivate future leaders in academia, politics, and business. Jen had spent his youth excelling in school, hoping to live up to his family's high expectations. Elizabeth, on the other hand, was not a Jefferson scholar, but she was still an exceptional student. She had spent her childhood in that elite boarding school that we talked about. She attended UVA on a different scholarship, although the details about that one are less publicized. Some accounts suggest it was merit-based or an international student scholarship, but it allowed her to study alongside UVA's brightest minds. They were both voracious readers, they were articulate, and drawn to deep philosophical debates. When they met at UVA's Brown College, which is an exclusive living learning community for high-achieving students, their connection was immediate and all-consuming. At UVA, Elizabeth and Jens were part of the university's vibrant academic community. Elizabeth, known for that charming, rebellious nature, Jens, with his academic prowess, they were both prominent figures on campus. Their relationship became increasingly insular, with the couple basically isolating themselves from others. Both students were enrolled in tough courses and interacted with several professors who noted their intellectual capabilities. However, specific details about their relationship with faculty members are pretty limited. Initially, Elizabeth and Jens engaged with a broader circle of friends and participated in campus activities. Over time, though, their relationship became all-consuming, leading them to withdraw from social interactions and other events on campus. This isolation raised concerns among acquaintances, but the depth of their detachment didn't become fully apparent until later on. In the aftermath of the brutal murders of Derek and Nancy, investigators embarked on a meticulous journey to uncover who could have done this to them. Their initial steps involved interviewing family, friends, acquaintances, just trying to piece together the victims' lives and to find any potential motives. Elizabeth, then 20 at the time, was among the first to be interviewed. On April 8, 1985, at the Boonesboro Elementary School, which had been transformed into a command center, investigator Ricky Gardner conducted her interview. Elizabeth's demeanor was notably composed. She spoke with a refined accent, a testament to her education in Great Britain. Her conversation flowed effortlessly across topics from the political climate in Zimbabwe to union activities in Nova Scotia. This left Gardner both captivated and somewhat overwhelmed. During this initial interview, Elizabeth recounted her activities during the weekend of the murders. She stated that she and her boyfriend Jens had rented a car in Charlottesville and driven to Washington, D.C. for a weekend getaway. They stayed at a Marriott hotel. The room was registered under Elizabeth's name. The bill was settled using Jen's father's credit card. This placed them far away from the crime scene during the time of the murders. As the investigators delved deeper, certain inconsistencies began to surface. The rental car that Elizabeth and Jens had returned had an odometer reading that exceeded the expected round trip to Washington, D.C., and not just by a little, but by 429 miles.
Oh, wow.
When questioned, Elizabeth said that this discrepancy was because they got lost en route and they had extensive driving around the city.
That's a lot of miles.
I know, to get lost 400 miles.
And to be just driving around the city.
Yeah, no.
Yeah,
That doesn't add up.
It's a small city. Initially, investigators were considering various suspects, including an ex-fiance of one of the Haysom sons from a previous marriage. However, as the investigation continued, they weren't really finding any other potential suspects or motives. Detective Ricky Gardner sat back in his chair, staring at case notes that were sprawled all across his desk. The crime scene at Loose Chippings had really been a portrait of rage, but the killer, or killers, hadn't left behind a trace of obvious clues. And again, no forced entry, no missing valuables, no random break-in gone wrong. This, he knew, was personal. Still, for a while, this investigation really had no clear suspects.
Did they blood type Elizabeth and Jans?
Not yet,
Okay.
because they didn't really have a reason to.
Okay.
Yeah.
What year is this again? Sorry.
1985.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they didn't have the ability to test the
DNA.
DNA.
Mm-hmm. Yep. As he looked through all of the stuff that they had acquired, you know, the autopsy, the crime scene photos, everything, there's just this nagging detail, that rental car mileage. He kept circling back to it, just like a mosquito in the dark, over and over and over. They started re-examining this detail a little bit. And because Elizabeth and Jens had told investigators they spent the weekend in Washington, D.C., they knew the car had been driven way too many miles for a simple round trip from Charlottesville to the capital. They actually did the math, and the miles were perfect to go between Charlottesville, D.C., and where her parents were, back to D.C., back to Charlottesville. Yep. Suddenly, this weekend getaway in Washington, D.C.
Felt like an alibi.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
It's so funny because I feel like as soon as we start these cases, I'm like, oh, I think I know who it is.
Mm-hmm.
But it's, you know, how we're telling the story. But I guess, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, so obvious to me. And then these investigators have no idea.
Yeah.
There's been a few of them where it's like, we
How
know
do you
who
not
it is.
know?
Yeah.
How did they not figure this out for so long?
Yes.
Yeah. On the surface, Elizabeth and Jens had done everything right to get that alibi. They had their hotel reservation. They had the credit card receipts. They had the perfectly rehearsed timeline down to the last detail. It's that nagging mileage issue.
They should have left that car there, gotten a different one, and driven that one back.
See?
Yeah.
If they had
Come
only
on,
been
guys.
smarter.
I know. Come on.
Be better criminals.
Yes.
That was my thought too. I'm like, why wouldn't you get another car?
Mhm.
That makes no sense.
Yeah.
They're so smart.
Just ask them.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Elizabeth had been so quick to explain it away. Oh, we got lost. And investigators just weren't. They knew you don't get lost and drive 400 plus miles.
No, that's
We got lost and
So
ended up at
far.
my parents' house.
I don't know what
Yep.
happened. Yeah.
No.
well, and
Yep.
in that case, you should be like, oh yeah, we went to go sightsee here.
Yeah.
do the math, figure out something else that's that far away.
Yeah. Further
Be
north,
smarter.
or
Yeah.
you went to Boston. I don't know.
Or
Like,
I
you'd
guess
have to
really-
go really far.
Yeah, or I guess really don't be smarter. 'Cause
Yeah, no,
we
don't be
want you-
smarter
yes.
criminals.
Still be
Yes.
dumb. Yeah.
Be clueless.
Yes.
Ah, yes. Investigators had spent weeks casually checking in with Elizabeth and Jens, treating them as witnesses, not suspects, but things were starting to shift. They interviewed the hotel staff. No one could confirm that the couple had spent the entire weekend inside. They pulled more records, and inconsistencies began creeping into their timeline. And then they started probing deeper into their relationship, and they found quite a bit that we'll go over.
Between,
Jens and Elizabeth.
okay.
Yeah. So, like I said, detectives combed through receipts, timestamps, gas station logs. They needed to know exactly where Elizabeth and Jens were that weekend. The Marriott Hotel receipt placed them in D.C. on March 30th, 1985, the night of the murders. But there was a significant time gap. They had dinner around 4 p.m., and there's nothing else until the next morning. So we have enough time. Large enough for a quick detour to Bedford County, where the Haysoms had lived. The rental car was returned the next day. So it's not like we had multiple days to put those miles on. On its own, this wasn't proof of murder, but it was something. When detectives asked Elizabeth to come in for a second interview, she obliged. She was, after all, brilliant, a woman who had spent years outsmarting teachers, deceiving authority figures, and bending people to her will. Surely she could handle a few more questions. Except this time, the detectives knew a lot more than the first time. They had been watching her closely, and now they were watching her closely in the interview, and not just her words, but her body language, her breathing, and the way that she reacted when pressed. And the conclusion they came to, she was lying. When they asked her again about the rental car, her answers were rehearsed and detached. When they pressed her about her parents, she spoke of them in past tense, almost as though they had died years ago, not just a few weeks ago. And when they asked her if she had any idea who could have killed them, she gave nothing, not a single guess, suspicion, or theory, which doesn't happen. When people ask, they always come up with something. You know, they can think of someone they had a fight with 5 years ago, or a business partner, or a friend they're no longer friends with, or a family member, say inheritance issue. I mean, something somewhere along the way, right?
Well, like a lot of the other cases we've done, they've had somebody.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone always, they all do.
They do. Yep. So detectives knew it's impossible. When people lose a loved one in a violent way, they grasp at all possibilities. They speculate, they accuse, they cry. What if it was someone from work? Robbery gone wrong. What if? But Elizabeth, she was blank. She had no idea, she said. Detectives weren't buying it. While detectives were tightening their focus on Elizabeth, a letter arrived at the Bedford County Sheriff's Office, anonymous. It claimed that Elizabeth had written a letter to a friend confessing that she and Jens were involved in the murders. Detectives were able to track down the recipient of that letter, and sure enough, there it was. In Elizabeth's own handwriting, a not-so-subtle confession buried between her usual poetic musings. It wasn't an outright, "we did it," but it was damning enough to warrant more questions. At this point, the detectives had a suspicious alibi, the rental car with too many miles, a hotel stay that conveniently left just enough time to go commit a murder, a weirdly emotionless daughter, and a letter hinting at guilt.
Do you have what that letter says?
I have other letters that she sent to Jens that we'll talk about.
Okay.
What investigators did not have was a confession and really no hard evidence, nothing that could get them a warrant to get further with her. And Elizabeth was not about to give them a confession. With Elizabeth's interview raising more red flags than a dictator's parade, investigators turned their attention to Jens. Unlike Elizabeth, who spoke with detached, aristocratic airs, Jens had a different approach. He was polite, he was respectful, and he seemed eager to help. He wanted to appear logical, methodical, above suspicion. But detectives thought maybe there was more to Jens. They didn't think that he was just a love-struck college student caught up in a whirlwind romance. They could tell that he was obsessed. and they were about to see just how deep that obsession ran. When Jen sat down for questioning, he was calm, confident. He wanted to be perceived as the smartest man in the room. He was always used to being the boy genius, the diplomat's son, someone who could outthink anyone else. They asked him about his weekend trip to D.C. His answers matched Elizabeth's perfectly. They checked into the hotel. They wandered the city. It was a romantic getaway. Jens did not realize that the detectives were already suspicious. He didn't know they already knew when he sat down for his first interview about the rental car mileage, about the time frame gap on the night of the murders. And he didn't know that any of the letters between him and Elizabeth had started to appear in detectives' hands. Jens thought that he was outsmarting them. Then the detectives asked him casually, "Jens, do you think Elizabeth could have been involved?" And for a fraction of a second, he hesitated. That single pause spoke volumes. Then, just as quickly, he composed himself. "No, of course not. Elizabeth would never." Detectives noted it, and they felt like they knew something Jens didn't. When you're covering for someone, you always hesitate before lying. In a follow-up interview, detectives went harder. This time, they confronted Jens about the extra mileage, the lack of a detailed itinerary, no receipts or timestamps during the time the murders occurred, the strange way that Elizabeth spoke about her parents in past tense, and the letters. Jen stayed cool, but his answers became more rehearsed. He thought in his mind that he was playing chess, anticipating their next move, trying to stay one step ahead. But detectives knew what they were doing, and they weren't just looking at his words. Just like Elizabeth, they were looking at his behavior. And Jens was cracking. They could see the tension in his jaw, the barely there shifts in his posture, the way that he repeated certain phrases as if convincing himself as much as them. He was smart, but he was not a seasoned criminal, and detectives were getting everything they needed. Jens and Elizabeth may have acted cool in their interviews, but they weren't stupid. They knew the walls were closing in. Before detectives could gather enough evidence to charge them, they disappeared.
Oh,
Mm-hmm.
was not expecting that.
No.
In October 1985, Jens, sensing the tightening noose of the investigation, fled the United States. He meticulously wiped his apartment and car of fingerprints and emptied his bank accounts. Before disappearing, he left behind a taunting letter citing his quote-unquote long-standing dissatisfaction with my life here in America.
Oh, nothing's more suspicious than wiping your whole apartment and bank accounts and fleeing.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah.
But
The normal response.
Yeah.
normal behavior to being
Yeah.
unhappy.
We all do that.
Your
Satisfaction. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was his reason for leaving.
Not suspicious.
Elizabeth followed suit just a day or two later.
He left without her?
Well, they planned to go separately so
Oh,
they
okay.
wouldn't be caught fleeing.
Oh, okay.
Oh, so that it was less suspicious that they're leaving the country.
Yeah.
Right.
With
Oh,
all
okay.
of their stuff. Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Smart.
Mm-hmm. Yep. The pair reunited in Paris on October 15th, 1985. From there, they commenced a journey through Europe. They went through various countries, including the UK, West Germany, immersing themselves in diverse cultures while meticulously avoiding detection. Their travels were financed through a series of fraudulent schemes, notably check fraud, which allowed them to maintain appearances and mobility. Throughout this period, they extensively documented their experiences in a shared travel diary. They intertwined, mundane, everyday observations with veiled references to their dark secret.
Oh,
my gosh.
Mhm.
smart.
Yeah.
Let's write all of this down.
Mhm.
That's going to be great when they find us.
And commit more crimes so they could possibly bring you in for something else.
Yeah.
Super smart.
So smart.
Mhm.
Seeking further obscurity, the couple ventured to Asia, with Thailand being a notable destination. They loved the vibrant, chaotic environment of Bangkok. It provided an ideal backdrop for them to blend in. However, their financial resources were tethered to illicit activities, perpetuating a cycle of deception and evasion and making sure they had to keep moving.
Mhm.
By early 1986,
Oh, wow.
Elizabeth and Jens returned to Europe, eventually settling in the UK. Their reliance on fraudulent financial practices continued, culminating in their arrest due to those financial on April 30th, 1986.
There's a saying I've heard that sometimes really smart people lack common sense.
Yes.
And that just feels appropriate right now.
Appropriate and applicable.
This was a year later.
It was 6 months. And
Okay.
Well,
A year after the murder?
yes.
Yeah.
Just over a year.
Yeah. And they left October 15th, 1985.
Okay.
And the murder was April 30th or something.
March
30th. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
March 30th. Yes.
Okay.
Apprehended for attempting to pass bad checks totaling over $5,000 in 1986, which is a lot more now.
Yeah.
They initially presented false identities to the authorities. However, a search of their shared apartment unveiled their true identities and, so much incriminating evidence. The search of Elizabeth and Jen's London apartment yielded just everything they needed. It illuminated the nature of their relationship and their potential involvement in the Haysom murders. Among the items that were discovered were passports and identifications. They had numerous different identifications with different names and from different places. They had numerous passports. They also found the passports of Elizabeth Haysom and Jen Soring, confirming their true identities. They had correspondence. They had a substantial collection of letters exchanged between the couple, revealing deep-seated animosity towards Elizabeth's parents and allusions to their demise. They also had their travel diary, which they had both written in and contained entries that, when looked at closer, suggested a shared culpability in the violent act committed in Virginia. The letters and diary entries they found are pretty wild. Some notable excerpts. In December 1984, Jens wrote a letter to Elizabeth, and he said, "By the way, if I should meet your parents, I have the ultimate quote-unquote weapon." He elaborated on fantasies that could induce severe reactions, including heart attacks, and mentioned a dinner scene he had meticulously planned, suggesting that Elizabeth's father might not survive a confrontation with certain spiritual revelations. Jen wrote another letter 4 days later, 1985, to Elizabeth and said, "The fact that there have been many burglaries in the area opens up the possibility for another under the same circumstances." Then a week later, he wrote one that said, "I have not yet explored the side of me that really wants to destroy. I still have to kill, possibly the ultimate act of destruction."
Wow.
That's scary.
Yeah.
Then there was a diary entry by Elizabeth that said, "The case will be solved soon. Perhaps the fingerprints Jen left on a coffee cup with the English police have betrayed him."
Well,
So glad these people wrote down all this incriminating evidence to make it a little easier.
Yeah. The explicit nature of these communications played a pivotal role in the subsequent legal proceedings, providing prosecutors with tangible evidence of motive and premeditation.
Yeah.
The discovery of the incriminating materials prompted British authorities to coordinate with their counterparts in Virginia. The detailed confessions contained within the letters and diary entries established a direct connection between the couple and the Haysom murders. This collaboration facilitated the extradition process and ensured that both Elizabeth and Jens were held accountable for their actions.
Good.
Yes.
yeah.
By April, they had been fugitives for several months. When they had been in London writing the bad checks, a vigilance store detective had been alerted to a series of recent fraudulent transactions that fit what Elizabeth and Jens were attempting to do at the time. And they called authorities, and a detective came and actually watched Elizabeth and Jen attempting to use counterfeit checks, which is how they were arrested. When police detained the two for questioning, they both gave false identifications. And somehow these cops just knew that something wasn't adding up. Jens had identified himself as Christopher Platt No. And the two, I think after being on the run for so long, weren't planning on being caught right then. And they separated the two and interviewed them. Their stories did not match up at all.
Yeah.
Inconsistencies through and through.
Yeah, they didn't have to have time to plan that one.
Yeah.
They did the other one.
Right,
Not
exactly.
rehearse.
Yeah.
As soon as the British authorities connected them to the Virginia murders, Elizabeth made a choice. She didn't fight extradition, not because she was noble and not because she wanted to tell the truth, but because she knew when she was cornered. She'd played the role of the quote-unquote brilliant manipulator, but now there were too many pieces of the puzzle falling into place, and she knew they all pointed to her. So she did what calculating people do. She tried to control the narrative. She didn't go to trial. Instead, in 1987, she pleaded guilty to conspiring to kill her parents. Not actually committing the murders herself, mind you.
Did she try and blame it on Jens?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Oh, yes.
Sure, he didn't like that.
No,
No.
he did not.
Yeah.
But he's dumb, too.
Yeah.
Brilliantly stupid.
Yes.
He's the opposite, where he's so noble. So he confessed to the murder
Oh.
and then spends the next 30 years wishing he didn't.
Yeah.
Elizabeth was sentenced to 2 consecutive 45-year terms, not the death penalty, and not even a life sentence, just enough to let her rewrite history in her head and convince herself she was a tragic figure rather than a killer. For Jens, when Elizabeth folded, he doubled down. He'd grown up in wealth and privilege and spent his life basically as an outsider, but, he considered himself brilliant and he knew he was a diplomat's son. So he fought extradition and he thought that he could just stay in Europe and he could confess and be noble and Elizabeth would love him forever and he wouldn't have to go. He claimed that if he were sent back to Virginia, he'd face the death penalty and that would violate his human rights.
Oh.
Yep, under the European Convention on Human Rights. So he had a case, Soaring versus United Kingdom, and it made its way all the way to the European Court of Human Rights in 1989. And guess what? He won.
Oh.
For a moment.
Okay.
The court ruled that extraditing him to a state where he could face the death penalty would be inhumane, which, to be fair, was a landmark ruling that actually changed international extradition laws. But here's the thing. Virginia was so determined to get Jens back that they did something rare. They said, okay, fine. We won't pursue the death penalty.
So then they sent him right back?
Yep. So the British government sent him right back. In 1990, he found himself exactly where he didn't want to be, on trial in Virginia. Jens' trial wasn't some high-stakes intellectual chess match like he had imagined. It was straightforward. They had the letters, the diary, and,
confession.
the fact that he had confessed multiple times before realizing it was a terrible idea. He was convicted on 2 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms. Elizabeth had already taken her deal and sold him down the river in the meantime. Jens was now locked away.
So did he take full blame for everything?
At first.
Mm-hmm. Like when he first confessed over in England?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay.
He did it alone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
wow.
Have
Then
we
Elizabeth
even
will love me.
heard
Yeah.
like an exact motive? Was it just because they didn't get along with them? I still don't understand
Yeah, she
the meaning.
She didn't like him?
She didn't like it. She felt like they were too strict, restrictive. Like, it doesn't appear that they had life insurance. It doesn't, she would get their money if they were gone, but
Yeah.
it doesn't seem like that was her goal. It seems like her goal was she did not want them around anymore.
So sad.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it is.
Like their only daughter.
Yeah.
That's
And what
awful.
a terrible way
Mhm.
Yeah.
to die.
Yeah.
So scary.
So gruesome.
Because I know you said at the beginning, like Elizabeth and Nancy didn't have it was a complicated relationship, but
Mhm.
when they show up to visit, they were probably so excited.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean,
It seems
I would
like,
be.
yeah.
No matter what your relationship is, you still love your kid.
Yep.
That's horrible.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's really awful.
They probably showed up. Hey, we're here to see you, and there's,
Yeah.
and
Surprise.
surprise. Oh, and now we're gonna kill you.
I know. And they weren't
Mm.
discovered for 6 days.
Yeah,
Just awful.
so
It's
sad.
awful.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
So Jens and Elizabeth sent letters back and forth while she was being extradited and he was fighting it. And they're still, in love, quote unquote. Elizabeth sent to Jens, promise me, Jens, whatever it takes now, promise me you will not let me ruin your life. I've seriously effed up mine. Don't let me destroy yours. I would kill myself if I discovered you were compromising yourself for me, which I think in their relationship was basically the opposite to him, if she's going to be noble and say this, I'm going to go one step further. And I really do think that Elizabeth knew that. Elizabeth also appeared to be guiding Jens on how to handle the incriminating evidence, emphasizing trust, keep it between us, Elizabeth wrote in another letter, I have been upset, scared, lonely, worried. You won't leave me to take the rap alone. She is hoping that
he will.
Yep. Mm-hmm. And
It's manipulating him.
yes, discussing potential legal outcomes, she mentioned, if I go to Germany and get convicted, I will go away for only a few years. Your parole board will give you early parole, especially when they take my early release into consideration. So, in a few years, we will hopefully both be out together. Just trust me and go with the flow.
It's almost like she picked him for this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of feels that way. And so, just like that, the toxic, intellectual Shakespearean romance that had left two people dead came crashing down in the courtroom when Jens was then convicted. Here's the kicker. Jens never stopped talking. In his mind, this wasn't over, and that's where things get even weirder. If Jens had taken his conviction quietly, the case would have ended in 1990, wrapped up, neat little bow. But no, Jens wasn't just guilty, he was this tragic intellectual hero of his own story. And tragic intellectual heroes, they don't just sit in prison. They fight, they protest, they write manifestos. And Jens, well, he was really into all of that. As soon as he realized that life in a Virginia prison wasn't quite as romantic as he'd imagined, Jens did what any desperate narcissist would do. He tried to take it all back. He said, actually, I did not kill them. Elizabeth manipulated me. He said, I only confessed because I thought my diplomatic immunity would save me. And then he tried, I was young, in love, and naive. Suddenly, the great and tragic sacrifice that he made for Elizabeth wasn't a sacrifice at all. It was a massive misunderstanding.
Oh,
Oops.
oops.
He claimed that he had only confessed because he thought that as the son of a German diplomat, he'd be sent to Germany, get a slap on the wrist, maybe take Elizabeth to Germany with him, and live happily ever after. The moment he realized that Virginia wasn't about to let him go back to Germany, he went into full damage control. Over the years, after Jens was convicted, he cultivated a loyal following of supporters who believed that he had been wrongfully convicted. And some of them were powerful. Journalists started looking into the case. Activists took up his cause. A former FBI agent even backed his claims, questioning the forensic evidence. German officials pressured the U.S. to let him go. Jens went on a full-blown media tour, from prison, of course. He wrote books, he gave interviews, and he positioned himself as the victim of a broken justice system.
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm. The way he told it, he was just a lovesick boy manipulated by a sociopathic femme fatale. His confession was coerced, misunderstood, and a mistake, depending on when you ask. The real killer, well, maybe Elizabeth did it, or maybe someone else, but definitely not him. And people bought it. The problem with Jen's innocent campaign was that the evidence never backed him up. Yes, there were inconsistencies in the forensic analysis. Yes, the case wasn't entirely airtight. Yes, Elizabeth was absolutely manipulative and probably had a bigger role than she would ever admit to. But that didn't mean that Jens was innocent. His confessions were detailed, and not just once, but multiple times. And they were never different. He knew things that hadn't been released that he shouldn't know.
That only the killer would know.
Exactly. The letters between him and Elizabeth painted a picture of two people consumed with violent fantasies. The blood evidence, while not as conclusive as modern DNA testing would allow, did not rule him out. And let's be real, his entire defense hinged on trusting Elizabeth Haysom's version of events. So, yeah. Jens kept up his campaign for 3 decades, writing, petitioning, and insisting on his innocence, and eventually it worked.
Oh, no.
In November 2019, the Virginia Parole Board quietly approved his release and deported him back to Germany.
Oh, wow.
Yep. Not an exoneration, not a declaration of innocence, but parole. He's still convicted of murder. He's still considered guilty under the law. And he served 33 years behind bars, but Virginia did decide he was done serving his time.
Wow. Is Elizabeth still in prison?
She was released in 2019 as well.
Oh,
and
lovely.
They sent her to Canada.
Oh.
Unlike Jens, she's kept a much lower profile. Jens lives in Germany. He is on a documentary on Netflix about this. He goes back and forth between German and English the whole time, and it's annoying because you look down to type or write, and then he starts talking in German, and you have to read it again. He's still trying to clear his name. He is still writing books, and he still insists that he's innocent.
It's so interesting, though, like things that he said that he knew that only the killer would know, but he's claiming he's innocent.
So I feel like in his head, he thinks that he can say Elizabeth told him those things because she did it. Or he can say he was there, but
didn't do it.
Part. Right.
I see.
Or that he was manipulated into it. So really he's not guilty.
Yeah, he's narcissistic enough that that is entirely possible.
Yeah.
What documentary is that?
The Netflix docuseries is titled Till Murder Do Us Part, Soaring versus Haysom. And it is interesting because you can see both of them. You can see her back then. She's not in it present day. And you can see him now. He looks so normal. Like everyday guy, you'd never know.
Not like almost cut someone's head off.
Yeah.
And then spent 30 years in prison.
That's comforting.
They show like all of the letters. You can see them. They show all the stuff they found in the apartment in Great Britain, like all the different IDs and passports and everything. Yeah. There are some crime scene photos and they show like the footprints, but none that are like overly awful.
So they never like really got in trouble for the stuff they did traveling Europe and Asia and all that?
Not really, no.
That just kind of went away because they were being tried for murder.
Yeah.
Took a back seat.
I mean, like they did those bad checks and were arrested, and 5,000 is a lot in 1986. And she was deported pretty quick after.
Interesting. They're just like, well,
right.
They probably thought they would go back and spend the rest of their lives in prison for that.
Yeah.
For murder.
Yeah. Well,
they were wrong.
Jen stayed in Europe without being extradited for 4 years.
Okay.
So I'm not sure if he was in prison over there, but it kind of seems like it.
Seems like he would be.
Yeah. So maybe he did time for both of them.
Maybe.
Over there. And she was starting their murder sentence in Virginia.
Okay.
Well, at the end of the day, no matter how many interviews Jens gives and no matter how many books he writes and no matter how much he tries to rewrite history, the facts remain. 2 people were murdered in a horrifically brutal way. And the 2 people who had the most motive, the most opportunity, and the most to gain from their deaths spent 3 decades in prison for it. Whether Jens held the knife or not, that is up for debate. But is he innocent? No. That's a totally different story. I don't believe that Jens and Elizabeth were star-crossed lovers or misunderstood intellectuals. They were 2 privileged, toxic, manipulative people who played a game that ended in murder. And no amount of rewriting history will change that. What do you guys think?
This wild case.
Mhm.
Yeah. Just sounds like such a horrific crime scene. I can't imagine walking into that and then for them to just like disappear for 6
Mhm.
months. That's crazy.
I can't imagine doing that to someone just because they're
Right.
restrictive.
Yeah.
It's
Reasoning
overkill.
for it is just
Like there is none. There's
Right.
no reasoning for what they did.
No.
And then now they're out and
Yeah, I
I
mean,
don't like it.
yeah,
I
she
don't
was
either.
born in 64. So what?
Yeah.
She's 61. She's been out though for 5 years,
Yeah.
6 years now. Yeah.
Mhm.
And she was never, I mean, I don't know if she did it, but she never was convicted for murder, right? Just conspiracy.
But yeah,
And I'm sure it was her, because you said that Jens said he would do anything to protect her.
their letters sure made it seem like they both did it.
Yeah.
And again, there were 2 sets of footprints.
There was blood from 2 different people.
Well, and she's the one with more of a motive than he is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Unless she
He has
just
no reason
manipulated
to.
him
Yeah,
into doing it. But
Yeah.
because she was older and he was so obsessed with her, so in love with her.
well, and you could see the possible gaslight, if you don't do this and that means you don't love me, it
Mhm.
could have been something more like that.
Yeah.
I'd be interested to see like their size differences physically compared to her parents.
Oh, yeah.
If they're standing, how would that work for her compared to him? If they probably both attacked him, I would think.
I would think so too.
I mean, that many stab wounds.
Yeah.
And if both the parents are there.
Well, the parents were in 2 different rooms when they found him too.
They were close to each other, though. It was like one to the other. It's like a living room, kitchen.
Oh, okay.
She was more in the kitchen. He was more like in the dining room area.
So maybe
It was,
they
like,
each
all
took
big
one
open.
and attacked him, like.
Yeah. You think about the logistics there
Yeah.
and how.
Or if they
feel
were
like it
both
had
in
to
the
be
dining
2
room
people.
and someone tried to run, or I don't know.
Yeah.
That's terrible.
Well, and I just keep thinking if he's attacking the dad, the mom's going to do something. She's not going to sit there.
Right.
And Elizabeth's not going to be just sitting there watching.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I mean, either she was holding the mom back or
I feel like there had to be 2 people there, at
horrifying.
least.
absolutely. They both
Yeah.
had to be there. They both had to take part in it, I think.
And they both
Yeah.
got cut doing it. Because
Yeah.
that's how you get 4 types of blood at the scene.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I would love if they could do DNA profile just to let us know.
Yes.
Yeah. If they still had those blood samples, like
Yeah.
if they could test them against.
I mean, they
Those 2.
probably don't since they're both.
Yeah.
But I would like it if they
It'd
did.
be interesting if they could test them now.
Yeah.
I feel like they both had to be committing the crime together.
I agree.
And
And
that she just
Didn't
kind of
like
got
them.
away with it.
Mm,
I don't
that
know.
Too, yeah.
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I'm glad that they both spent time in prison.
Yeah, they both spent 30 years in prison.
Yeah.
So that is a good part of their lives.
Yeah. She spent 33 years.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, took away that college future, chance to travel. I mean, they
Yeah,
were
have a family.
smart and
Mm-hmm.
threw it all away.
Yeah,
Awful.
it's awful that, I mean, he was involved and people believed that he wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But I mean, it's crazy that you would do that just because you were in a relationship with a girl. Like,
A girl who didn't like her parents.
yeah,
You brutally
you don't
murder them.
really know
No.
them and you
I-
have no reason to dislike them.
That's insane.
It sounded like he had like some kind of dark fantasy kind
That's
of thing
true.
too. So I'm sure that she sought out someone that she knew would carry this out with
Well, I'm
her.
sure she fed
I
into
guess.
that too.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
Oh, you want to do this? Oh, I have some candidates. Like,
Oh, yeah.
He's on the documentary saying she walked in. She's just the most beautiful girl that he's ever seen and like instantly in love with her.
Just infatuated with her.
And it just seems like no matter what she asked, he would have done it.
Well, and you said that they both were very smart. And if she'd been manipulating people her whole life, basically.
Yep.
Yeah.
And he's giving her
Some love-struck puppy.
Yeah, exactly. And she can take advantage of that.
Yeah.
Yep.
So horrible.
Yeah. there's a solved case for you.
A crazy one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely a crazy one.
I'm glad that they caught them and they're not still abroad.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, right?
Yeah.
Man, because without that, I mean, it would have been hard to convict them in the 80s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very interesting case.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it is.
that is
Want
an
to watch the
interesting one.
documentary.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
It's good. Lots of like court videos and segments and things. We'll list that and all the other resources that we used on our blog, which you can find on our website, crimeclueless.com, under the contributors section. And we'd love to know what you think. Do you think Jens is innocent? Do you think he's a really, really convincing liar? Was there a different motive? Let us know.
Was Elizabeth part of it?
Exactly. Do you think she conspired or participated?
Participated.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah.
I think we're all in agreement here.
Yeah, I think so. I think it adds up with the evidence.
Mm-hmm.
So let us know either on our social media platforms. We're on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, all of them at Crime Clueless, or send us an email and tell us what you think. Or if you have any true crime stories of your own, we'd love to hear those too and feature them on a future episode. You can email us crimeclueless@gmail.com. If you enjoyed today's episode, we'd love if you'd share it. We appreciate your support. You can find Crime Clueless on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube, iHeart, and all major streaming platforms. And thank you again for listening. Remember, refuse to be clueless, careless, or caught off guard.
Not today, murderers.